It's episode 110 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Thanks for joining me each week as I sit down and interview authors about the creative process and writing. I've had so much fun over these 110 episodes, and I hope that you have too. If you have, would you please go to hankgarner.com and subscribe to the show? And while you're over at iTunes, please rate the show and leave a comment. That helps other people find us. It helps us move up in the algorithms a little bit. And click on the Amazon banner at hankgarner.com. I would appreciate it. Also, be sure to visit our sponsors. You can find them at the bottom of the show notes at hankgarner.com. This week we add a new one. Ellen Campbell, editor extraordinaire, joins the ranks of sponsors for Author Stories. Ellen has a veritable who's who of people that she has helped polish their books and bring out the very best. You can find her at ellencampbell.thirdscribe.com, and please let her know that you heard about her on Author Stories. Also, thirdscribe.com is there to help you, authors, handle the business of writing so that you can get back to doing what you need to do, and that's writing. Go to thirdscribe.com today. Find out how they can help you do all of the stuff that writers don't want to do, because we want to be sitting at the keyboard and telling stories. That's thirdscribe.com. Thanks for listening. Now on to our interview with Patrice Fitzgerald. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm very happy to have Patrice Fitzgerald on the show with me. And Patrice has, if you're in the indie author community, you definitely know her name and you know her work, and you've seen her all over the place. And I am very fortunate to have pinned her down for a little while to come on the show this week. Welcome to the show, Patrice.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Patrice, I always start the show with the same question, and that question is, when did you first know that you wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, that's the classic question. I think that I started reading early, as a lot of us did. I stole my brother's reading books when I was pre-first grade. I think now they teach kids to read in kindergarten, but we weren't supposed to learn till first grade. In fact, the nuns, I went to a Catholic school as a kid, the nuns said to my parents, "Oh, don't let her read." I don't know why. But anyway, I did read.
Oh my
and
goodness,
I think,
that's awful.
Well, I'm sure they've modernized a little bit. But as soon as I read, that's the gateway to hearing, knowing stories, reading them on the page, and that's when I thought, I don't even think I had the concept of writing stories myself. I just knew this was something I was attracted to and I would do. Gotcha.
What were those first stories that really captured your imagination? What does anything jump out at you that has stuck with you?
Well, this is really going way back, but Dr. Seuss, everybody has done the Cat in the Hat and the very well-known ones. The one that grabbed me was On Beyond Zebra, because it went through the alphabet and then it added new fantastical letters. And I've never thought of this before, but perhaps that was the beginning of the science fiction and speculative fiction connection, because it was just that. It was something that was straight out of the imagination and kind of wild and crazy and made up. And that's a big part of what attracted me.
Sure. I don't think we give enough credit and credence to some of that early childhood reading that most of us fell in love with, that gave us an appreciation and an ear for the cadence of kind of poetic prose that's not exactly poetic prose. But yeah, I think a lot of us could look back and pin down some of our love for these things from some of those early books.
Yeah, I have never thought this far back in terms of early books, but the funny stories and stories that were kind of exotic always attracted me. And then a little later I got into the more, some of the classic stuff. I read a lot of British fiction as a young person, Jane Austen, etc. And, you were mentioning that I'm all over the place. Well, indeed, my whole writing career is all over the place, because one of the things that I do under a pen name is write Pride and Prejudice fan fiction. So that may be something you didn't know about me.
I did not know that about you. That's amazing. I live with 4 women, with 3 daughters and a wife, and there's a lot of Jane Austen type stuff that goes on in our house. And I was never a fan of Jane Austen, just because I'd never really spent any time with her work, or any of that period work, really. But it's really some fantastic stuff in there that I think, well, for a lot of reasons, I think a lot of men don't get exposed to that, and I love that. What is it that really appealed to you about that time period, that genre, that style of writing?
Well, of course, I loved the original story. I love Pride and Prejudice, and it's one of those books that I've gone back to over and over throughout the years. I've probably read that book more times than any other book in my life. And I have some friends that are in it's called JAFF, Jaff, Jane Austen Fan Fiction. I have some friends in that community, and they were telling me it was not only fun, it was lucrative. And some people write the sexier tales, and mine are definitely sexy, thus the pen name. But they are not anything that we would consider shocking these days. They're more like regular stuff. It's not 50 Shades of Jane Austen. I'm sure someone has written that. But yeah, my husband was in the same situation when I asked him to help me by beta reading some of those earlier Jane Austen fan fiction stories that I wrote. He had not been exposed to Jane Austen, except he read Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, and he thought that was fun. But I told him that was pretty faithful to the book, but it left a lot of it out, and of course added zombies. So he went back and read the original, and he was really impressed, which is cool. As you say, I think most boys and men don't think of it as their story, but it's a human story. It's very involved and clever. It's got a lot of language that is it's from another era, but we can understand what was going on. We can understand all of the nuances. So, and when you said you live with 4 women, are you trying to get the younger 3 married off? Is that part of your quest in life?
No, not at all. We're trying to postpone any of that activity for quite a while.
Okay.
My oldest is 18, but she's starting college this year, and we're still trying to shield her from all of that. So.
Yes, well, back in Jane's day, that would be like, okay, time to get her out into society and marry her off. But
I know.
Fortunately, that's not the case anymore. So.
Yes, fortunately so. So when did you? So you developed an early love of reading and then storytelling, and you had this desire. When did that start actually manifesting into putting words to paper and actually starting to craft things?
Well, I did the usual occasional story for school, I'm sure, in elementary school, high school. And when I was in college, I was an English major, although it took me a long time to get there. I started out in physics, and I considered French and drama, but ended up in English. And so I did take one creative writing course and wrote some stories for that. And they were lots of fun. I'm actually surprised it took me as long as it did. I think that I wanted to be a writer, and then I kind of bumped into adolescence, and I thought, oh, that's hard. That's for smart people. I also kind of thought that it was mostly for men, which is odd because I was reading Jane Austen and I was reading Harper Lee, although I didn't know she was a woman. And I remember reading The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, but I didn't really get that it was a woman. So somehow, anyway, I got stopped at adolescence, and it took me quite a while to get back to it. And but I finally got serious after sort of telling people, oh yeah, I'm going to write a book. I finally did start writing about 20, even 25 years ago now.
Okay. What was that first idea that you had that you wanted to fully finish and see this as a story or book?
I had written short stories. The first novel-length idea that I came up with was inspired by the fact I was a lawyer at the time. I'm still a lawyer, but I don't practice anymore. And I happened to be, this is going to sound like I'm all about the women writers, but certainly not exclusively. It just happens to be a topic that started me. I was I wasn't part of the firm, but I was sharing office space with a law firm started by 3 women, and, it was small. It was kind of a boutique firm. And I thought that was fertile ground for a novel. And so I wrote a novel based on that and having 2 of the partners in conflict. In fact, the original title was Conflict of Interest. And
I like it.
Yes. But it's ironic because I didn't know enough about conflict at the time. I mean, I wrote the whole novel. I wrote it in about a year, which seemed very fast at the time. And I sent it out to agents and actually got an agent who was interested, but it didn't have enough conflict. I probably have the manuscript knocking around somewhere, and I've thought of resuscitating it, but I think I had the idea for one basic, as I said, conflict between the characters, but not enough of a whole plot. So I started out as a baby writer, and that was the first novel that I wrote.
And so you got an agent, but it didn't have what it really needed to go further. What did you do after that? Did you did getting the agent kind of bolster your confidence and say, okay, well maybe this didn't work, but I'm bitten by the bug. I'm going to keep at it. Was that your experience?
It did and it didn't. The fact that this agent was interested was great, but the fact that it didn't sell after she sent it out to a few places was discouraging. And one of the things that was funny was that she must have had a reader, a local reader, or maybe somebody who worked at the office, go through the manuscript. And when I told her that it's kind of a long story, but somebody else I knew thought that she could sell the story for me, so I asked the agent for the book back. We didn't have a written contract. It was kind of a handshake. So I said, I have somebody else who might be able to sell this. So she sent the manuscript, literally the manuscript back, because this was before people used electronic manuscripts that much, as I said, 20 plus years ago. And it was covered with sticky notes from this person who had read it, who was very critical, didn't say anything about the plot being weak on conflict, but did say that, it's so crass, it's so commercial, some people might like it, but I would never read such a thing. And that just was hilarious to me, that first of all, the agent didn't even, or her assistant who packed it up didn't even notice all these sticky notes that were insulting my book. But also, of course it was crass and commercial. I wanted to sell the book,
Right.
I was thinking more in terms of, I don't know, the stuff that I was going to say, is it Joan Collins or Jackie Collins, whichever one used to write the books, or, some of the very commercial people rather than literary fiction. But right after that, I started to join writing groups, critique groups, and I quickly came up with the second novel-length idea, and I actually worked through the plot with some of these other people, which helped a lot. And the second one I wrote much more quickly. I also didn't sell that to for publication, but I eventually published it myself. And that was the first book that I published almost exactly 5 years ago. The 4th of July weekend in 2011, I published that electronically. And that's Running, which is my political fiction and very apropos to this moment in time.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about that, because I have it pulled up on my screen in front of me right now. That was the first book that you published. Before we get into talking about the book, how did you shift gears from shopping this with an agent to publishers to then saying, okay, I can publish this myself? Well, obviously the landscape had changed. KDP had come along and that whole indie revolution. But how did you find that, and how did you get plugged into to doing that?
Well, it took a long time, because the Running was conceived of in the very beginning, way back when the first Clinton was president, and the whole Monica Lewinsky issue came up. And I remember being fascinated because I don't know if you're old enough to remember Bill Clinton.
Of course. Yes.
But the internet was a relatively new as a force in news.
Right.
And I remember this thing called, I hate to mention his name because it's not my favorite site, but the Drudge Report. Yes, that was kind of his beginning.
Exactly.
And I watched on television as they were talking about this scandal as it was unfolding, and I thought, what would it be like if there were a woman politician who was in a similar situation? And of course, this story in Running is not at all like what happened with President Clinton, but it does involve a woman politician running for president who has a past. She has some history, as, you know, don't we all? And so that was the beginning of it, and I think, I don't even know the dates for that anymore, but certainly late 90s, right? So I wrote the book, which took me about 6 months, and I did the same thing. I sent it out to agents, and one of the first agents called me right back and said, "This is fantastic. I stayed up late at night reading it. I rarely do that." And she was a newish agent, but she was at a big agency. And so I was all excited. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be rich. I'm gonna make a lot of money. I didn't even mention that the first book, which did not ever sell, which has not yet gotten published, a friend of a friend mentioned it to somebody in New York, and they wanted to put it on TV, do a TV movie about it. So that was the first book, the conflict of interest book, and that never happened either. So I now understand that these things, even when you think your ship has come in, don't always happen. So back to Running, I did probably try to. That agent ended up changing her mind on the book for reasons that I'm still not clear on. I had other agents who looked at it, and eventually, somewhere between the late 90s and about 2010, when I started to read about self-publishing, I changed my mind about it. Basically, I had friends who were not writers who would say, "Well, can you publish it yourself?" And I would explain to them, "Oh, well, that's the death knell to a real," and I'm doing air quotes here, if you could see on the podcast, "to a real writing career, and agents won't touch you, and, big publishers won't touch you." But I became persuaded around 2010 that that was a thing of the past, and I should publish it myself. And I sort of saw it as a stepping stone to getting the attention of a bigger publisher, and because some of that was happening at the time. Somebody would read it online, or it would be a big seller, and they would say, "Oh, here's a contract for X amount of money," which was my goal originally. But I did publish it, and it did pretty well initially, not huge. Then there was a big bump when I got involved in putting it in what used to be called a KDP Select, which is that now it's Kindle Unlimited. Anyway, so there have been a lot of sales of this book, but I have never been in a situation where I was picked up by traditional or Amazon publishers, and now I'm thrilled that that was the case because I do much better on my own.
It's really crazy, Patrice, to we published 108 episodes of this show as of the time of this recording, and to hear how many people have self-published and then from there done some sort of hybrid publishing where they're like Hugh Howey has done, maintaining digital rights yet contracting with a publisher for print rights, and then everything in between there. It's so hard to imagine and to remember back to just a few years ago when what you said was the truth, that self-publishing was seen as the death knell for a writer. It's so insane to see how the landscape has changed, and to think back that really was the case. That the mainstream publishing community had such a hold on publishing, and thank God that that's a thing of the past.
Yeah, it has happened. It might not have seemed that way to some of us, but it has happened very rapidly.
Right.
You can trace it if you look at. I mean, one of the people that I had been reading online and was really inspirational for me was Joe Conrath.
Yeah.
And if you go back and look in 2010 or 2011, he's encouraging people, but there's still a lot of pushback and there's some defensiveness from people who are self-publishing. And then you get to 2012 and they're like, hey, this is kind of cool and I'm making money. And you get to 2016 and, I mean, indie publishing is definitely the preferred way. Many people understand it now to be advantageous in a lot of ways, and not just financial, but the control that you have, which isn't to say that I don't know a lot of people who are hybrid publishers, hybrid meaning, as you know, of course, both traditionally published by the big or small publishers and self-published, but there's also a lot of in between. I mean, in addition to writing novels under my own name and having two pen names. One is the Jane Austen fan fiction, and I can tell you that one, even though they're a little sexy. That pen name is Lily Lord. So I'm now out of the closet with that pen name. I have yet another pen name for quite sexy stories that are contemporary alpha billionaire types. But I also publish other authors. I have two other authors that I publish in my little mini publishing company, and they concentrate mostly on, one of them is into cozy mysteries. She has a very successful cozy mystery series, and her name is Geraldine Dufresne, and hers is the Sam Darling cozy mysteries. I mean, I'm mentioning her because she's really very good and doing well, and I want people to know that there are lots of different ways to go through this. And my other author is Ann Kelleher, and she has a lot of different kinds of stories, but one set of them are paranormal romances. And they were traditionally published back in the 90s, and she retained the electronic rights. So I now do the digital versions for her as her publisher. And then I'm also the series editor for a space opera anthology, which I think you're going to mention at some point.
Yeah,
I have a whole list of things here. Anyway, that one is the second one that was out in the beginning of April is Beyond the Stars, A Planet Too Far, and we're just collecting stories for the third. So I have so many irons in the fire. I'm a very busy, multi-pronged, multi-tentacled publisher, entrepreneur, writer.
I love it, and all of us as authors, whether indie, traditional, or whatever, really should consider ourselves entrepreneurs, because no matter if you have a publisher or you're completely indie, there's a lot to this other than just sitting at the keyboard and writing. One thing that fascinates me about your story, and I would love to hear more about this, is your boutique publishing, where you operate as a publisher. What does that relationship look like between you and your authors?
Well, as I said, it's very small. And these are people that I knew prior to my own self-publishing, and they approached me and asked me if I would do this. And I am approached regularly by other people who want to be, again, air quotes, published by someone else. And I usually say to them, well, you don't need me. I mean, I'm happy to hold your hand or give you advice. But there are people who do not want to spend the time on the business side of it. They're a little intimidated, or they just, that's not their thing. And of course, it has to be said that I have a financial stake in this, so I profit from the fact that I'm their publisher. But I also have, as I mentioned, a legal background, and I'm kind of I am at heart a very entrepreneurial person. I like to organize things, and I like to pay attention to the details, although it often takes a lot of time. And I like to be in control. I mean, it's so much fun. We're just in the process of putting together the third space opera anthology. This one is going to be quite a mouthful, these titles: Beyond the Stars at Galaxy's Edge. See, I didn't put numbers on them, because when you put numbers on them, like 1, 2, 3, 4, people tend to buy number 1.
Right.
And they're not really connected, except that they're the same series editor. So in any case, we're just now collecting stories for that. And one of the things that's most fun for me is the covers. Yay! I get to commission the artist. And for this particular series, we've been using double Hugo award-winning Julie Dillon as the cover artist, and she's just amazing.
They're phenomenal.
Yeah.
They're gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous.
True art, and that's, I mean, I have to say that it costs us, but hopefully you can see in that beautiful art the quality of the product that we're putting out. And I've just seen the sketch for the anthology number 3, and that's very cool to be in on that part of the process and say, well, mostly I just say, yes, I love it. Sometimes I give her a little more like, oh, can you tweak this color here or there? But mostly it's up to her. I mean, that's why you pay an artist. That part, and the decisions about which stories to choose, because I have people submitting stories now for this, and it's quite the responsibility. It's lots of fun. It takes a lot of time, but to think that you have somebody else's stories in your hand, it really gives me the sense of being on the other side of the table and having to pick and choose, because you can't put them all in there. So all of that is thrilling, time-consuming, and fun.
And I do not envy your job there, weeding through no telling how many submissions you get. But when I read the first one, the Dark Beyond the Stars, a space opera anthology, I was just blown away. And I guess several months ago that I read it, but I could only imagine how many you got submitted to have this product that you wound up with. I do not envy that task.
Yes. Well, we've kind of been changing the model over time. The first one was a little bit different, where we, actually the first and second, we chose the authors to be included because we knew them. You know, we knew their work, yeah, and we knew their reputations. And it was also helpful that a number of them were New York Times or USA Today bestsellers, because that means, you know, you right there get a boost in your visibility. This third one, we have some authors that we have invited to submit a story, as in you're in, unless it's really terrible. Don't tell them I said that. But none of them are ever terrible. They're always brilliant. And then we are also letting other writers submit. I say we are very grateful that other writers are interested in submitting. And that's a humbling thing for a writer to write something on spec. I mean, we're always doing that in essence when we write these books, and even if we publish them ourselves, are the readers going to buy it? Are they going to love it? Are they going to recommend it to friends? But in this case, they send the stories in to me, and I have the responsibility of deciding what kind of meets the bar, and there are many of them that do, and then what fit with the other stories, how many can squeeze in there. There's, only a reasonable number that you can have. And so I've gotten several dozen already, and the deadline is July 1st, so I expect to get many more, and it's going to be tough. I already have too many on my oh yeah, that's cool list. So we'll see.
That's awesome. So we've got law firm drama. We've got political. We've got a political story in running. We've got Jane Austen fiction. We have space opera anthologies. How do you pick what project you're going to do next when you have such varied interests? And let me preface that by saying I love to see authors that work in different genres, because to pigeonhole an author is such a crime. Readers, we all love very different things. There's no reason that writers can't love to do different things as well. How do you kind of decide, okay, this is what I'm going to work on next, this is what's kind of bugging me at the moment that I need to, got an itch that I need to scratch? How do you determine what's up next for you?
Well, it's such a good question. How do I determine? I'm pretty much running as fast as I can. Picture the train on the track, and or perhaps, maybe the train on the track isn't a good analogy. But anyway, if you were, all right, you're in your spaceship, and you're going through an asteroid belt. So whatever is going to hit you next, you run away from or dodge out of the way. Basically, I keep up with whatever is the next most urgent project. And recently, that has been Geraldine Dufresne's Cozy Mysteries, because we just took her first three, put them in a box set. We call it Triple Trouble. And that has sold really well. We have it on sale right now, and because that's doing so well, we're going to take the next three and put them in a box set. And I've been busy getting all of the ebooks into print. We're just about caught up with all 5 of them now, plus the first box set. And she has just turned into me a couple of weeks ago, actually, number 6. I'm running behind. Don't tell Jer. Jer, if you're listening to this, I'm reading it as fast as I can. So she's on a roll. And what tends to get the attention is the thing that's making the money, too. I mean, I go back and forth on having pet projects because I'm looking at my, you probably know what Book Report is, which is the software that tells us how much money we're making. And when something is showing up as the high earner for this month, all of a sudden I love that project. That's like, I'm going to spend my energy and time on that, which only makes sense. So, but it's like having a bunch of different children. I don't mean the writers. They're more mature than that most of the time. But, I mean the books, and you don't want to forget any of them. So sometimes I have to find something that isn't selling as well and give it a little bit of attention. But mostly I'm running as fast as I can.
And that goes back to that entrepreneurial spirit, that we really have to pay attention to what's working, what's maybe not working right now, and what and the way I like to look at it, instead of maybe in just crass dollars, if a book is selling, then it's connecting with an audience. And if I'm connecting with that audience, I want to keep connecting with that audience. So that's a great place to follow up.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And that does sound a little less crass.
But not that we're opposed to crass, but I'm just,
right.
It makes it more palatable.
I at this point, I never intended to do exactly what I'm doing, but I am now diversified with a capital D. And I think that really bodes well for my career as both a writer and a publisher, because the things go in and out of fashion, and old books can find new life. I'm in several. One of the things that I should mention, and well, and I'm sure you've talked about this, is how the indie writing community, the self-publishing community, is just phenomenal in its support of other authors. Somehow, and I give credit to people like Joe Conrath, and certainly to Hugh Howey, people like David Gaughran. Actually, I've never said his name out loud. I don't know if it's Gaughran. He's Irish, so who knows? So these people sort of were the mentors for a whole generation of self-publishers, and they fostered sharing of information right down to, how much people are making this month and how they managed to get their book out there and get noticed and get read. There's this wonderful, it's almost kind of kumbaya support of others and helpfulness, reaching back to the next guy or gal. I never use gal. I think that's like for men who don't want to say women, but man or woman or non-binary person, whoever you're reaching out to support them and help them make a career, because there are readers all over the world who can read these stories. And that's another thing, that we're just barely touching the beginning of this worldwide exposure to digital books. And it's going to be huger than I think we can imagine. We are so lucky in that people who grow up knowing English are at an advantage right now, because the world at this point in time, and who knows how long it will last, sees English as a very important language, and a lot of people learn it, and a lot of people want to read in it, so that we have an immense globe full of people who can read our stories, and that's part of why it is so exciting.
Well, and it's a pretty bizarre time that we live in, and I've talked about it on this show many times, about how I'll lay in bed at night and just flip through my Kindle, and I'll go to Kindle Unlimited, and I'll just browse, just look for new books and new authors and things like that. I can remember as a kid, and some people are old enough to appreciate this, that we lived out in the country, outside of a small town. We had one library, one bookstore. So outside of those two places, if you wanted to buy books or get a hold of things, the next place to get books was when you would have a book fair at school. And we would get these catalogs a few weeks ahead of time, and you would browse through the catalog, and then you would order books, and like 4 weeks later, these books would show up at school. And so there was this sort of, I don't know, books had this strange quality. They were kind of rare, and when you got a hold of something new, you read it over and over and over again. And now I literally lay in bed, and with my thumb on my Kindle Paperwhite, I just browse through pages and pages and pages of novels that I can download in 2 seconds, and it's really. It's a crazy, crazy time that we live in.
It is mind-boggling. That's so interesting. I had, my family was, we weren't by any stretch of the imagination poor, but my parents were careful about spending money, let's say. Right. My dad in particular grew up, very influenced by the Depression. So when I was a super eager reader, they wouldn't buy me books. I mean, it was, you didn't need to buy a book. You go to the library. So I'd go to the library, and the maximum was 10. So I'd get my 10 books and I'd bring them home and I'd read those. And then I'm like, Mom, can I go back to the library? And my younger brother, and he won't listen to this, so it's okay, was a less eager reader. I mean, he's a super intelligent guy and reads now. But so they bought him books. And I'm like, hey, how come you're buying him books and you wouldn't buy me books? But of course, of course now it's so incredibly affordable, as you say, but before ebooks were a thing, I would go to Borders or Barnes and Noble, and for the month, I mean, you could spend a couple $100 if you bought new hardcovers. Oh, yeah. I really had a book problem at the time. Now I don't really like to spend much more than $5.99, $6.99 for a book, and that's a lot to me, because so many of them are available. But it is both the Kindle or e-readers or your phone or wherever you're reading your books, and of course the internet and the web have changed the world in ways that it could not have been contemplated even 20 years ago, because the stuff that people have accessible is incredible.
Getting back to that comment you made a minute ago about the indie author community and the bit of the kumbaya spirit, I like the way you said that. You're absolutely right. I remember early on in my publishing journey, and I like you was reading people like Howie and Conrath and all of those people a few years ago that were really kind of stirring up the trouble, as it were. And someone said, and I can't remember who, it was probably either Hugh or Conrath, said that we're not in competition with one another. We're in competition with YouTube and with Netflix and with Facebook. Our real competition is getting people to read, and then once we get them to reading, then we can help each other to steer them, toward our individual works. And that has really stuck with me. And I've found that to be true, absolutely, that there's no shortage of readers. And we're not competing for the same piece of pie. We're growing the pie.
I completely agree, and I think that was probably Hugh Howey, because
probably so.
I've read similar things from him. I think one thing I do want to say is it's not as though people who are traditionally published are nasty and competitive. I don't think that's the case at all.
No, absolutely not.
But because the indie writers are so much an ebook phenomenon, which is another new aspect to this. We were online a lot, maybe one could argue too much social media. I know I can be subject to that myself, but so we're connecting in a way and on a daily basis and in various groups, some of them private, some of them public, where we do share this information, and I don't think that has always been available. I mean, it didn't exist until, fairly recently for traditionally published authors. And I do think that we're trying to, with our stories, fascinate people and not so much get them away from YouTube, but say, hey, this is cool too. Read a book. There's nothing bad about reading a book. I mean, it expands your mind, and it uses your brain and it uses your eyes in a way that demands a little bit more of the consumer than the passive watching that television or YouTube or movies do. So, especially for young people, I mean, not that they're looking to me for advice on how to spend their time, but reading is good for everybody.
Since writing that first novel 25 years ago or so, I think you said, what have you learned as a writer that when you look back, do you see things that you did then that you say, oh, if I'd only known this then X would have happened? Or kind of how have you grown as a writer in that amount of time?
Well, I see many things that it's not so much I wish I had known then. I mean, I didn't know then, so I can't go back in time. But more than that, it's the world of writing has changed so much. I mean, it's changed a lot in terms of course, self-publishing and the way one gets noticed within self-publishing, but also the way we are consuming our stories. I mean, I think we are, as I know Hugh has mentioned, and other people have mentioned as well, we are in kind of the golden age of the shorter story, or novel, or novelette, novella. You know, there are all these different designations that I think people pay less attention to. And part of it might be that you can't see
how thick a book
exactly.
is.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at the percentage or the numbers, but it's one of the reasons that I know on Amazon they'll tell you how many pages in the real book. So everything that's been part of my journey until now has kind of led me to this place, and I'm very pleased to be at the place I am. So I don't so much say, gee, I wish I knew that then. I mean, I think back to that very first book and I say, well, I didn't really know how to write, you know. I mean, I knew how to write. I could string sentences together very well, and I could even write some scenes, but I didn't know how to plot a novel to give it that kind of arc, to give it tension, as I said, to give it conflict, which is ironic since it was originally called Conflicts of Interest, or Conflict of Interest. I guess it was singular. It changed its name probably 10 times. I mean, I am so thrilled and so lucky to be making a living at this. My husband is still a working person, thank goodness, but he will be leaving that job in just about a year from now. And our plan is to take like a 9-month trip around the world. So this is, as long as I have an internet connection, I can still do my thing occasionally, and we're going to sort of try to work that out, the traveling along with the publishing and writing, and sort of keeping all the balls juggling. And that would not have been possible at any time before in my life, you know, nor was that market there until very recently. So this is stunning, and I'm just joyous that this is the career that I ended up in.
I love that so much, that you're at the place where you can do that, and that we live in a time where you can do that. That's so amazing. Do you have a daily writing ritual?
Oh, I should. I should. I think, you know, in the mornings I wake up and I say, okay, I'm going to write first and get that out of the way, and then do the business aspects, and there are many.
Right.
And I find I'm not a regimented kind of person in that way. No doubt I waste too much time on social media, but even beyond that, there's always just catching up with the email, and there's this emergency or that one, and I tend to be attracted to the shiny thing. So, no, I don't have a routine, and I keep thinking that when I grow up I will, but I'm not that young anymore, so I suspect it may not change. But it seems to be working out okay for me. I can't complain. I get the things done that I need to get done, and if I spend more time on one project or another, well, that just must be what's calling to me that, you know, on that day.
Well, growing up is very overrated, I've discovered. So, you know, if it works for you, then you go for it, sister.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just like you. I kind of the best laid plans of mice and men, but you know, sometimes it just happens when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're planning on traveling for 9 months, I'm going to assume that you don't hold your writing space as sacred. Are you able to kind of pick up a story wherever you are and work on it?
Well, I guess we'll find out, won't we? I did actually, a couple of months ago, 3, 4 months ago, I was visiting my daughter out in Los Angeles, and I had a deadline. I needed a self-imposed deadline, a story that I wanted to get in, and I managed to do that. I brought my computer, and I did it at her little kitchen table. And then the summer before, I had this is really ironic. I had a deadline for my own first space opera anthology, and I'm like, I am not going to be late getting my story in, because of course I was sending it to the editor, who wasn't me. And I was writing as we were traveling down the coast from Portland, Oregon to San Francisco, California. So all along the coast, and it was very lovely. We actually rented me a computer. I'm trying to think, how was I trying to, I'm not sure how I was trying to write that story, but we had to rent me a computer, and we stayed in a bed and breakfast one extra day so I could get it done, and I did get it done. So yes, I have been able to write when on the move and in different places. But more than that, my last summer, about this time last summer, I switched to, it was about the time that I started writing the Lily Lord, Jane Austen fan fiction. I started dictating my stories, and that doubled my speed. So I was able to produce, when I do sit down and do it, I can do a couple thousand words in an hour. And if you're writing on the short side, you can produce, stories very quickly that way. The other thing that I'm just trying to learn to do is do it while I'm walking around, so I can get some exercise and create my stories and be out in nature. And I haven't yet figured out the system completely for that. So that's the next step. And then I will be healthy, young, beautiful, slim, rich, and creatively satisfied. So that's my goal.
I love it. I love it. Patrice, if a reader is not familiar with your work, and you could recommend one of your stories for them to start with, that you think would set the stage for them and would be a grand introduction to you and your work, what story would you recommend?
Well, that's a tough one because I'm in so many different areas. But I think I would say, and I don't think I had even mentioned this, one of my earlier ventures a couple years ago was writing wool fan fiction, which is why I know Hugh so well and his work so well. And it started out with a short story, which is free. Actually, it's always free. It's called The Sky Used to Be Blue. And that's under my real name, Patrice Fitzgerald. And that is the gateway to the novel that collects those 5 shorter episodes in what I call Karma of the Silo. And so those are both wool. Well, that whole thing is a wool story, and it's based on a character that was created by Hugh and shows up in his Silo saga, and I sort of took that character and carried through with the theme. But that's if you're into science fiction. If you're not into science fiction, you might really enjoy Running. I know you said one, but Running is just so completely different. It's political thriller, but it's also got a lot of action and fun, and it's everybody should read it right now because it's about a woman running for president, and just in case we do get a woman president, then maybe it won't be as apt because it's not a it's a story that talks about how that's challenged to be the first woman running, and that may not be the case very much longer if that woman becomes president.
True. And I just downloaded it to my Kindle, so I'm going to start reading Running tonight. Patrice, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on the show. Where can people connect with you and follow your work?
I'm on Facebook, but I can't take any more friends. I think I've got all the friends I can, but you can follow me just under my real name, or you can go to my website, which is just the simplest it can be, www.patricefitzgerald.com, and I will endeavor to keep it up because I think it has, I have not posted recently, but I'll do so. And this has been so much fun. Thank you, Hank. And I think that I went in many different directions, but then again, that's very authentic because my career goes in many different directions.
And that's the way we love for it to happen, because real life and real conversation does not follow an outline. So we love it. Thank you for taking time out to come on the show. We're going to put links to all your stuff in the show notes and send everybody to see you.
Thanks so much.